Good afternoon. Welcome back, everyone. Apologies for being a few minutes late back there. I was having a few connection issues, so hopefully that won't happen again this afternoon. So it's now nearly 1:30 and we shall resume the inquiry. Mr. Village, you may call Mr. Lathbury now. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, ma'am. Mr. Lathbury, you're Alan Lathbury, and you're the Business Development Director at Dignity Funerals Limited, the appellant.
Yeah.
The appellant is part of the Dignity Group of companies, being the largest operator of crematoria in the United Kingdom, and you operate some 46 crematoria across the UK, is that right?
That's correct.
And you've been employed by Dignity for over 21 years, and during that time you've grown the Dignity portfolio from 22 to 46 sites, and specifically you've overseen the completion of 5 new build crematoria, the acquisition of 16 existing sites, and the transfer of 3 sites from local authority control.
Yeah.
In addition, Dignity is in the process of building out 6 crematoria that have been granted planning permission, and you led the Dignity response to the recent investigation by the Competition and Markets Authority, I'll refer to it as the CMA, into the funeral industry, and you prepared submissions for both the funeral and the crematoria businesses of Dignity.
That's
and that involved providing a detailed response to over 20 requests for information from the CMA and attending 8 panel meetings with members of the CMA team. And the CMA concluded the investigation in December 2020, and the final report is at CDE 2. We may refer to that shortly. Dignity performed around 65,000 cremations in 2019, being the last full year before the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which is more than any other crematorium operator in both the public and private sectors in the UK. Given the legislative restrictions relating to the location of new crematoria, Dignity's new build facilities are located, you say, in either the Greenbelt or the countryside, and your evidence has been prepared in support of the appellant's appeal against the refusal of permission by the council. Now, I think the rest of that we can take as read. Paragraph 1.15, can you confirm that the evidence which you prepared and provide for this appeal is true, and that the opinions expressed are true and professional opinions?
I can confirm that.
Yeah, thank you. Good. Right, well, I think we might take that as read, and I'd like to understand a bit about the background to the location of this of a facility in this area.
Yeah, as you're aware, and I think it's taken as evidence that we operate the Rotherham crematorium. It was an operating management contract that Rotherham Metropolitan Borough Council brought Dignity in to manage that site and the surrounding cemeteries in 2008. Also, I was involved with a kind of open services dialogue with Wakefield Council in 2012 and 13, where they were exploring options for the private sector to get involved in various parts of the council, one of which obviously was bereavement services. So we looked around their existing council crematory provision through there. They decided not to go ahead with the private sector. I think at the time they were looking to build up some surpluses and do some investment in their existing crematorium. And more recently, we noticed that the Doncaster crematorium was increasing, and we decided to do a site search area that was around the Doncaster area, with us focusing in both to the east and the west of the A1M to the south of Doncaster. So that's the long story of my knowledge of the area.
Yeah. What's your view about the importance of 60-minute service times?
Yeah, it's a very important consideration. There's two elements to that. Obviously, legacy busy at capacity crematorium have difficulty in moving to 60-minute service times. For example, we run 45 minutes at Rotherham. 45 minutes is dignity based, so we don't run any crematoria course slots at lower than 45 minutes. About 2/3 of our portfolio is running at 60 minutes. The key importance for us is the avoidance of the conveyor belt, the avoidance of having two sets of mourners, two sets of traffic, hearses and limousines on site at the same time. And also, increasingly with a 60-minute service time interval, it allows the mourners up to 45 minutes in the chapel, which we believe is increasingly important when increasingly there's more and more audio visual and digital music and digital photos and digital movies available to be played on the site. So it's a very, very important qualitative initiative for us. And there's a number of sites where competitors have opened up against us. And I think this is a fundamental difference between Dignity and Memoria. We not only operate new build sites, which I think nearly every new built crematorium in the UK, if memory serves me, is opened on 60-minute service times. We operate the legacy facilities as well, so we understand the pressures and the limited dynamics of those. And a good example is Lancaster and Morecambe, where we had a new build open up against us. We lost some volume to that new competitor, but we shifted the site onto a 60-minute service interval, and that allowed us to up the qualitative offering. So you get two elements. You get consumers who now have a choice between Lancaster and Morecambe and the new site, and also users of Lancaster and Morecambe have the opportunity to have the qualitative benefit of a 60-minute service slot.
Okay. Could I ask you about the Competition and Markets Authority investigation, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And this, I was surprised in how little reference was made to this by other operators. There's two reasons for me bringing it in. It was a 2-year longitudinal survey, and by using the word longitudinal, I mean it was across the whole of the bereavement services sector. It was all the major participants. So I understood that Dignity, definitely, Memoria, Westerly, and local authorities were brought into that. Also, it included the funeral director side, so it captured all the bereavement services sectors through there. Also, it was undertaken by the CMA. And one of my criticisms sometimes is that crematoria operators sometimes focus on what crematoria operators thinks the market wants, whereas the CMA was the first time a consumer champion came in and looked at the market, and took a view and gathered evidence on that. Also, the evidence that was submitted was under the Enterprise Act, a section of the Enterprise Act, so there were financial penalties and ultimately custodial sentences if any misleading or misrepresented data was submitted through there. So it was a very broad and a very detailed investigation, not from the provider of those services side, but on behalf of the consumer. So to me, also, as Mr. Village touched on there, the final report was 18th December 2020, so it's probably the most complete and up-to-date reference point in terms of funeral provision and crematoria provision, and therefore it's a very, very important and a very detailed reference point for the market.
Yes, I mean, I think it's fair to say that Mr. Jameson Hodgson doesn't seem to be very enamoured by it. Is it possible to for you to turn it up, please. I just want to look at a number of the planning, a number of the observations made in respect of it.
Yeah, just where it's a big document, so it'll take a while. Okay, yeah, final report.
So I think it's E2, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did Memoria give evidence to the CMA?
As far as I'm aware, there were references in the report to Memoria. We weren't privy to who attended hearings or who did not attend hearings. My understanding was that they gave evidence, and to the length and breadth of their involvement in the hearings, I couldn't say.
And are they in fact mentioned?
Yes, they're mentioned in the main report, and also obviously any submissions were redacted, but there were interim reports and provisional reports as well, and they responded to those in various degrees.
Excuse me, sorry. What's the document?
It's a very, very long report.
Yeah. What was? Is it possible to discern from the report what evidence Memoria gave?
It's able to discern, key elements that the CMA chose to incorporate into the report. Obviously, some of the detail and obviously quite correctly, some of the operational numbers were rejected. But it's quite clear that and this is my opinion and Dignity's opinion, that they perhaps weren't as enamoured with the CMA investigating the crematorium market. I would view the responses to the CMA investigation as falling into two camps. There was people who welcomed the opportunity to put evidence forward to the CMA, and I think a lot of the CMA involvement was agitated for by consumer rights groups, Verify, Finance, Quaker Social Action, from there. So I think there was certain sectors, both in the funeral and crematorium, which weren't happy about the CMA involvement, and there was other parties who decided to cooperate fully with the CMA and take it forward.
Right. Well, I think I just want to look at some of the conclusions that it's reached in relation to, in particular, Memoria's evidence. Does the CMA report include a summary of the evidence given by Memoria?
Not that I recognise. I think it was everyone's evidence was committed to the body of the report. There were, however, written responses to various provisional decision reports and interim reports, which would be under the name of Dignity, under the name of Westerly, and under the name of Memoria.
Well, I'm just looking at the executive summary here.
Okay, I've got the main report open.
What did the report have to say about catchment areas and the 30-minute cortege speed time?
Yeah, I think the CMA took the 30-minute cortege drive time catchment area. Also, they asked for crematory operators' comments on using a 30 minutes. But I also understand that they ran sensitivities around a 40-minute cortege drive time zone as well, primarily to look at how much choice consumers had in the provision of crematoria, i.e. how many other crematoria were within a 30-minute catchment area or 40-minute constrained drive time areas.
What are the key conclusions flowing from the CMA report?
I think there was two main conclusions flowing from the CMA report. The firstly was that the supply of funeral the choice that consumers were offered in terms of crematoria, i.e. only having one crematoria available in a 30-minute catchment area or 40-minute catchment area, were very, very constrained through there. And also that, and we were involved on both sides in this analysis, they were looking at funeral directors providing into crematoria and how dependent funeral directors were on one crematoria or two crematoria. So to give you an example of the data flow there, they would look at a funeral director and look at its volume and say, where did each of those cremations go to? Were they using one crematoria or two crematoria? So from both sides of the coin, i.e. consumer choice about crematoria and funeral director choice and usage of crematoria, I think they concluded that the market was very constrained and very restricted.
And what was its response in terms of remedy to that restricted market?
I think we view the response in two elements. There was a CMA order that mandated two things in relation to crematoria. Firstly, there was a mandated price. That this wasn't an actual physical price, but there was a mandated format for the price. So each crematoria had to show a cremation fee that included all fees and charges. So there was no discretionary, this is the price, but you have to pay for emissions, and you have to pay for an urn, and you have to pay for X. So there was a mandated price. That also had to clearly highlight what you were getting for that price: 40-minute chapel time, 45-minute chapel time, or 60-minute chapel time. So consumers could clearly see the price they were paying at the crematorium and what they were getting for that price. The second element was that each crematorium had to distribute those price lists to all the funeral directors in a 10-mile radius to make sure that funeral directors had up-to-date pricing information through there. And on the other side of the fence, there was a CMA order that mandated that funeral directors made their clients aware of the choice, if available, of crematoria in that area. So it was quite clear that the funeral director had to make sure their clients were given the correct information, allowed to choose between various crematoria in the area, even though some of those crematoria would be further away than other crematoria. So basically, they were shining a light on crematoria provision and the prices of those crematoria.
In overview, why do you consider, if you do, the CMA report to be important? Why is it a material consideration?
I think there's two elements to that. They clearly found fault with the existing provision of crematoria, and but they recognised there were high barriers to entry, the significant upfront capital investment. They also noticed the restriction, and there was various bits of evidence about the supply of new crematoria coming onto the market, and accepting that both the capital requirements and the planning requirements to bring those sites forward. So they were key elements. The key thing was that highlighted quite starkly is the amount of crematoria that face little or no competition within both 30-minute or 40-minute catchment areas, from that respect. And also from Dignity's perspective, the CMA came out with their final report, but it was mandated that they were keeping a watching brief on the industry, both the fuel industry and the crematoria industry, and it's Dignity's assumption, I would stress that there is potential for the CMA to come back into the markets if they believe their remedies aren't sufficient to address the adverse economic consequences that they perceive existing in the funeral market and the crematoria market.
And that's the so-called sunlight remedies.
Yeah, they're the sunlight remedies. And you've got to understand that the CMA's power is constrained by the Enterprise Act. So they don't have, as far as I'm aware, they don't have powers to change the planning system, and they don't have powers to change the regulatory regime around the fuel industry. And one of our recommendations is to bring regulation in for the fuel industry. But obviously they do not have the mandated powers to do that. They have to hand that off to Parliament.
Okay, can I ask you some questions about qualitative and quantitative need, please? First of all, what's your view as to what constitutes a qualitative need?
In terms of qualitative need, and this is a topic we've opened up, is you come back to can you get a slot in a crematorium? So we come back to the capacity constraint issues, the 80%, and it was kind of interesting that the CMA ran off 75% through there. So that was their constraint on capacity. The second element, the most important element for us, and I think Peter Mitchell agreed with it in his evidence, is we look at the what we call the funeral delay, the length of time between registration of the death, the date of the death, and the date of cremation. And obviously we're privileged in having funeral directors in the South Yorkshire area, so we were able to measure the delays between death and cremation. So that also shows you how long people are waiting to have their cremations, and obviously that's a key metric. And again, I criticise the fuel industry and the crem industry because we focus sometimes too much on what we do, and we don't always appreciate that there are some very distressed individuals who are looking for closure at a very important time of their life. And I think if you combine those funeral delays with the restriction on the choice in terms of crematoria, that can lead to ultimately a very distressing situation. And the final qualitative ones are where we opened up with on the 60-minute service times, the kind of, the modern, light, airy, kind of digitally equipped modern crematoria that privileged new build operators like Memorial and Horizon have whole portfolios of those, and Dignity and Westerly are getting a more balanced portfolios of those modern facilities.
Yeah. What's the tipping point in terms of waiting times for a funeral?
Yeah, and Dignity's position is we think 14 days, up to 14 days is an acceptable time. Sometimes people look at that and think, my God, 2 weeks, but you've got to remember there'll be a number of days potential delay for registering the death. The government's cut back on registration offices and things, so sometimes there can be 2 or 3 days delay. I think there is a mandated 5-day period in which you legally have to register a death, and then following on from that, then obviously people are trying to typically on an attended funeral get mourners together and choose a typical time. So typically anything above 14 days is what Dignity consider unacceptably high. If you're getting over 3 weeks and consistently around over 3 weeks or around 3 weeks, then obviously there is in Dignity's mind a clear deficiency in choice, and that is impacting the quantitative ability of consumers to choose and to switch and to move between different operators.
What's your view on just a couple of things in relation to the detail? The 85% cremation rate. What's your view about that?
Yeah, the 85% cremation. I'll take that in two pieces. The 85% cremation rate is off the back of an increase in death rate. I joined Dignity in 1999. We were seeing around 600,000 deaths a year in 1999. That dropped round to around the mid 540s in 2009 and 10. Since then, in 2011, death rates have increased, and now, and I'm going to. I always talk pre-COVID because we don't put any reference on anything after 2019 at the moment. We saw deaths approaching back up to the 600,000 rate. You've got to understand there's two fundamental drivers for that. There was the uptick in birth rates after the Second World War. Our methodology is simple. You know, a cremation is predicated on a death is predicated on a birth, or net immigration. So post World War II, you saw the 1950 baby boom, and we assessed that as where births were above 1 million. So there was a spike there. And the second wave coming through was what everyone typically recognises, which is the 1960s baby boomer generation, which was 1962 to around 1969, where we consistently saw births up around the 1 million mark. So there's two waves of populations going through that. We believe that is what that, combined with new build and people being given more choice and more availability of crematoria, is what is driving cremation rates forward. One of that, even if we built no more new crematoria, we still believe that 1950s, 1960s population, increasingly kind of non-religious, increasingly used to modern facilities, will increase the cremation rates going forward. So and what we see in that growth in crematoria and cremation rates, you know, it's the same social pressures you see in healthcare sector feeding into the NHS. You know, ultimately those pressures are going to come through to the crematoria sector, both in absolute number of deaths and we believe an increase in cremation rates to around the 85%.
Okay.
Sorry, Peter, you froze there.
I'm sorry, I've frozen. Am I still there?
Yeah, you're back in the room.
Right, okay. Yes, just a quick one on rebalancing. I mean, Mr. Best is dealing with this in his evidence in detail. But what's, from an operator's perspective, what's your position on rebalancing?
Yeah, I think there's two elements to it, and I'll go through in detail because probably unlike new build operators, we have access to data from capacity crematoria, constrained capacity crematoria, as well as new builds. Sometimes you get, you know, I deal a lot with new builds, and sometimes you get a biased view of the market because on a new build crematoria, the light, the modern, the area, you know, you've always got slots available. The volume's always growing as they mature over year 3, year 4, year 5. So you've got to remember that the bulk of provision currently existing in the UK is older facilities that were built in the 1950s and 1960s through there. So you know what you typically see, and we've had experience of this several times, is, you know, when a new facility opens, you know, there's a gradual migration of the breed to the new facility, and then the volume at the new facility will pick up. And then you will see what we term a rebalancing, that some of those will migrate back to the existing facility. And I liken it to John Stuart Mill. It's the invisible hand. You can't see the individual people making that choice, but you know it's happening through there. And the other evidence we get when we closed Rotherham, not closed, we restricted the services at Rotherham while we refurbished the chapel in 2018, probably about £1 million refurbishment, and we saw a dip off in the volumes of that site. Even if you could get a slot at the site, it wasn't the best position because there was workmen on site and there was scaffolding and various things. So we saw a decrease in volumes in 2018, but we saw that rebalance back when the chapel was fully open with all the audio visual and the nice individual seating in 2019. So and also you see it in clusters of crematoria. So if you look at the western arc of Rotherham, Barnsley and Pontefract, they all reach a level where they're all kind of butting around the 2,000, 2,100 cremation mark. Either that is they all serve identical markets, or consumers are making a choice and migrating to and from individual crematoria. And also, you know, I was at the inquiry in Works and Essington, which triggered the rebalancing, where the situation was that the Dignity site would be doing 1,400 cremations. The Westerly site, from memory, would be doing around 1,600 cremations, and the Wolverhampton site would be doing 700-800. That would clearly rebalance out because the Westerly site would be really, really busy and not have availability of slots and our service times. The Dignity site would be reaching capacity at that, so there would be a natural migration back to the existing council crematorium, especially if they invested in our service times. And I think the clear point is, you know, you want to choose the new crematorium at Brodsworth. You cannot get the slot you want. You want to go there, it's the closest one, but you can't get the slot you want. You can go to Rose Hill, which has a slot available and perhaps it's moved to an hour service times. Would you then go to Rose Hill and save yourself a week's delay or 10 days delay? You may face an extra 5-10 minutes in your journey, but that's a decision, and we believe that's decisions bereavement families make and are used to making. So that in effect is a rebalancing. And when you look at clusters of crematorium, you see them balancing and bobbing about at the same levels. The issue we've got is if there is no new capacity put into that system, then they can't rebalance because there's nowhere or very little choice for consumers to make. So then that manifests itself in increasing waiting times because the consumer, the bereaved families, can't rebalance because everyone's operating on constraints. So they have to wait, and they have to wait 2 weeks. They have to wait 3 weeks through there. So that's an overview of the rebalancing effect.
Are those waiting times acceptable?
Sorry?
Are those waiting times acceptable?
No, as I stated right at the beginning, anything above 14 days starts to become unacceptable in terms of that. And that's where the provision of new crematoria starts to come into play. Sometimes existing sites have land available, but what we find a lot of those sites, that the urban sprawl has caught up with those sites and surrounded those sites. So sometimes it's very, very difficult to implement extra chapel. And also the ground around them has been consecrated. And by consecrated, I mean that with scattering of ashes, and sometimes there's cemeteries with burials on there. So it's impossible to put more capacity onto the same site.
Yeah. Next point relates to direct cremations. Is that the figure that's been used by Memorial, the Rule 6 Party, is 20% as at 2033. Do you agree with that approach?
No, there's two elements to that number. We don't agree with that number because that is an individual operator that operates a number of new build crematoria at lower volume levels. So, and also they offer a direct cremation service, so a direct promoted service, which I think was under low cost funerals, may have been rebranded. So we think that number is excessive. There's two reasons for that. We started offering our simplicity funeral, which was, when we started off, was a what we call a unattended direct cremation service. So basically, the deceased is brought to the facility out of hours, typically at 8:15, 8:45, and a cremation takes place and the ashes are returned to the funeral director. So there's no attendance on site apart from a private ambulance dropping the coffin off.
Yep.
Under our Simplicity brand, we introduced 2 attended services. The intimate, which is restricted to 12 people and is typically early in the morning. We use that off-peak 9 a.m. slot, which has had very, very little take-up. So we looked at using that 9 a.m. slot as a 9 and 9:30 for those. And obviously what we call the family-led direct cremation, which basically is you do not get the cortege, so you don't have restriction of the cortege speed, but you have unrestricted use of the chapel. So you potentially could have a 2 o'clock on a Friday, or 1 o'clock on a Friday, some of our busiest slots. So it's 2 elements to direct. It's how do you define correct? And I think Jonathan best uses the analogy of the hybrid. At its very cleanest, it's the unattended, which yes doesn't impact on capacity and constraints on an individual site. But when you bring in that attended element with people arriving by car, you start to bring in capacity constraints because they're using the car park, they're using the chapel through that. You don't typically on those products, you don't have the funeral cortege, so there's no hearse and no limousine. The coffin is already on site and it's delivered through there. So it's still nascent and it's still a startup. It was growing. It was a part of the market. It's here. That's why Dignity decided to start offering direct cremations, and it's probably why the Wesley Group have just launched their direct cremation offering. I think it's naive to believe that anything that starts off from a base of next to zero is going to continue to grow exponentially. I think it will grow. I don't know how much further it will grow. And a countervailing argument, and this is Dignity's position, is that the cost of low-cost funerals, and includes in the name and simplicity, is they were a much cheaper and much more flexible alternative arrangement from an all singing, all dancing, full service funeral. And what has happened under the CMA mandate, the CMA has mandated what they call a CMA attended funeral, which they brought in, which has to be available at all funeral directors. So there's a comparable funeral offering, and Dignity, as at October, have brought that in at £1,995 price point, £1,995. So the clear gap that existed between a direct cremation and a full service funeral has closed considerably, and I think that will countervail the growth of direct. But it'll be interesting to see how that grows going forward. The one criticism I would make, we in Dignity do not use any 2020 data. For large parts of 2020, we had no one at our funeral directors, we had no hearses, no limousines, no interchurch, and we had no one at our crematoria, so there was no attendance. Sometimes it could be 3 or 4 family members. Under those circumstances, why would you pay for a full service funeral that included viewing, that included unlimited attendance at the crematorium, when all of those were restricted? So that's why we jump all our data off 2019, and that's where we use as the base year.
Good, thank you. So finally, any warrant for using 20% as a direct cremation rate?
We don't see any evidence across that as across a market as a whole. There may be individual companies, and Pure Cremation are, I believe, with the originator of the products in the UK. They then suddenly decided to build their crematoria, so they have 70-80% cremation rates, but they're nearly all unattended. Memoria have 11 sites and a much lower attended volume. So even if they did the same amount of direct cremations as Dignity, their cremation rates would already be higher. The third element is, as we already touched on, you've got the local authorities who are not that commercially focused. Will they catch up in the market? So I think there's 2 elements to that. I think it's unfair of any individual company to use its methodology and say that methodology that we operate under is going to apply to the market as a whole.
Right. Next matter, environmental issues, and it was said by Mr. Jameson today, Mr. Hodgson, Jameson Hodgson today, that the rise in the search for net zero carbon emissions means that actually the number of cremations are going to reduce. I mean, he didn't really go into any detail as to what he thought it would reduce by, but he thought it would reduce, or certainly not grow, at the rate of 85%. What are Dignity doing about achieving a net zero increase in carbon emissions?
Yeah, I think it's to answer. I'll touch on. Jameson mentioned, Mr. Hudson mentioned the rise in green and natural burials. Ever since I've been involved in the bereavement sector, we've seen hundreds of new green burial sites, and I see various numbers from around 200 and 250 bandied about a green burial space. And you've got to remember, against that backdrop, the rise of cremations as marched forward inexorably. We think the cremation rates will slow down, and 85% is a good upper limit, not an upper limit, but it's a good prudent limit for cremation rates. We recognise, and it will be hard not to, that the current climate is to a more sustainable, and quite rightly so, a more sustainable view on many parts of life, including driving motor vehicles, use of public transport, heating the homes and things like that. So we started working with our suppliers about 12 months ago in terms of trying to achieve a net zero carbon emission crematorium. So we would be able to launch a net zero carbon emission product onto the market. We think we've got the technical pieces in place, and I'm not an expert on cremators, so I'll give you a brief overview, but we think by using sustainable sources of gas from natural sources, we think by reutilising any excess heat from the cremators to offset any normal gas usage for heating the chapels and things will make a contribution there. And finally, by using ground source heat pumps, we think we can get to a position where the cremation process itself will be net zero carbon, and hopefully and almost definitely some of the next 6 crematoria that Dignity build will be net zero carbon crematoria, and hopefully we'll get that certified. And then almost definitely if Brodsworth is approved and construction sites, it will be under that net zero carbon crematoria banner, and we can able to offer the market and fuel directors a net zero carbon cremation process.
Thank you very much. Those are all the questions I want to ask.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Robson, would you like to commence your cross-examination, Mr. Lathbury?
Thank you, Bob. Good afternoon, Mr. Lathbury.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yeah, I can hear and see you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. If at any point you can't, please do say. I just want to understand where I can position your proof of evidence within the other evidence that's before the inspector. You, as far as I understand it from your proof of evidence, are not a planner or a landscape architect. No,
I know no formal qualifications in those areas.
And you do have, however, experience. So you said, tell us 21 years working at Dignity of experience in operating within the market. Would that be a fair characterization?
I'm not I don't operate crematoria.
No, not as an operator, but operating within the market. So you understand how the market works.
Yes, I understand the dynamics of the cremation market and the funeral market. And,
yes.
And the more recently the building of new sites and acquiring existing sites.
And at your 1.14, you say that your evidence should be read in conjunction with the evidence of Mr. Best, Mr. Kirkpatrick and Mr. Williams. I just want to understand precisely where we're going. So Mr. Best, where I've got questions about quantitative and qualitative need and the analysis of that, I should direct my questions on that to Mr. Best.
Yes, that is correct. In terms of the reference, as I say, I'm not a qualified planner. I'm from the background of the industry, so I provide the industry overview to Mr. Best, so he directs a lot of questions to me. I feed that through to him. He quantifies that and does the quantitative and qualitative detailed analysis through there, and obviously he's professionally qualified to present that information at hearings and inquiries.
We've already heard from Mr. Kirkpatrick about landscape and visual impact and issues with green belt. I'm assuming you don't want to go there again?
No, absolutely not. My knowledge of green issues, and I have no expertise in that industry, and I wouldn't even offer my probably prejudiced personal opinion on those matters.
Good. And when we get to Mr. Planning policy and importantly weight, so using planning judgment to give weight to material considerations, those questions are for Mr. Williams. Yeah,
absolutely. I see my role as just feeding in the industry and what we attach weight to and what we as Dignity attach weight to and what Westerly attach weight to and Memora attach weight to sometimes don't impact on the planning process. So I have no professional expertise to assess what attaches more weight and what doesn't attach more weight.
Okay.
We rely on team professional advisors for those areas.
So, for example, if we were to consider the weight that should be given to the CMA report, that is a question then for Mr. Williams.
Yeah, in terms of the planning balance, I would also say selfishly, as I said under evidence in chief to Mr. Village, our operating assumption is the CMA will come back into the marketplace. We clearly want to highlight via emails and planning inquiries that we've taken note of the CMA final decision report, and we are using that information and trying to, as we see it, resolve some of the issues. We have been fully cooperative with the CMA in terms of compliance and in terms of the ongoing reporting requirements that sit upon all crane operators.
But just so that I can understand, I'm sure the inspector understands already. You've put in your proof various parts of the CMA report and given your view of what it means. Yes. But yes. Then in terms of how that would affect a planning decision, so the weight that can be given to what is in that report, that is a question for Mr. Williams. Yeah, absolutely. I felt these issues that we've discussed, not just in this inquiry and other inquiries, that there was a body of evidence in the CMA report which should be should be produced as evidence. But obviously, it's up to Mr. Williams to present that to the inspector, and the inspector to view that and attach no weight or little weight or a lot of weight to those matters. Well, we might start with no weight when we get to Mr. Williams. Let's leave that for Mr. Williams. You then, sorry, just to go back one paragraph, at 1.13, you set out the structure of your evidence, and it's your section 3. You say that I outline the process undertaken by the appellant to fight. Sorry, was that? I thought for a second Mr. Mitchell's dog might have been back. No, very good. Small mercies. I outlined the process undertaken by the appellant in identifying the site as the optimum location for the appeal scheme, including the area that would be served by it. So if we go to your section 3, please. Yeah. That's headed site selection and choice. Yeah. Do you have that? Yeah, I'm in section 3. Were you involved in the site selection process? Yeah, there's two elements to that. At a top level, we identify areas around the UK where we think there are requirements for a new crematorium, and that's a commercial decision on Dignity based on our operating model and where we think there's a sustainable market for crematorium. We highlight those areas and then we look at those areas and identify potential sites, and then that's where we bring in, I think John Williams will go and look. I'm not planning, so I'm not able to provide a planning view
a field, I will just look at it and say, yeah, that looks really good, not being fully aware of the planning restrictions. So then John will whittle down those sites, and then he'll present us with some final options that hopefully we can take forward as a crematorial site. But certainly the site search areas are mandated by Dignity, but the individual sites come down to a balance of what I think will work. Primarily, we're looking at the 200 yard and 50 yard rule, 50 yards off the public highway, 200 yards from residential, and John or one of our other planning advisors giving us on a view on the likelihood of planning being secured and not being secured on those sites.
Yes, and of course the statutory requirements apply to every new crematoria, don't they, in terms of distance from the highway and distance from residential?
Yeah, absolutely. As no one's challenged those as far as I'm aware.
No, and you say then that the search area is mandated by Dignity. Could you pull up, please, the Mr. Planning Statement, please, which is CDB8.
So what's planning statement? Sorry.
Set planning statements for the application, which is CDB8.
Okay, you have to bear with me because I'm running off Clyde & Co's directory.
No problem.
Is that Mr. John Williams' planning statement?
That's the planning statement for the application. Yeah, that's right.
What reference was that again? Sorry.
So it's CDB8.
B8. Planning statement, including statement, community involvement.
Yes, that's right.
Bear with me while it loads that.
And then figure 4, which is on page 54 of 93 electronically.
Yes, it's just loading up on my laptop.
No problem. You just tell me when it's loaded up.
Okay, that's open.
So actually, if we could go to Appendix 5 of the planning statement first, and that's page 91 of 93 electronically.
91.
Not quite as long as the CMA report, but not far off.
Nothing's as long as the CMA report.
War and Peace.
Yeah. You said page 91.
So page 90 is the heading Appendix 5, Site Search Plan and Land Requirement Mailer.
Site search and land requirement mailer, yeah.
You see that, and then we scroll down.
Yeah.
And there's the plan with the red line, boundary, dotted line. Do you have that? And we see that the red line, the dotted line, is the site search zone. Yes.
Yep.
And we can see the areas in green are the green belts, the areas in yellow are the countryside area, and then almost directly to the south is Doncaster.
Yeah.
That red dotted line, when you say that Dignity mandate the search area, was that the mandated search area for this scheme?
Yeah, that was our initial outline view on it. We shifted down towards the west of that arc. So typically we start with a search area, but then we widen the search area out from that if we don't find anything that meets our specific requirements.
Where's that wider search? If this is a question for Mr. Williams, if I'm straying into that area, then please let me know. But you did say that Dignity mandate the search area. Where is
Yeah.
that wider search area that moves to the west? Where can I find that?
I think that whether we have redrawn that or not, I wouldn't say. But I think that was a question for Mr. Williams. Typically, we start with where optimally we'd like to be, and then we expand out of that area, depending on where we find suitable sites. I think from memory, my recollection was to move towards the kind of, trying to get my bearings right, to the west side of Doncaster, around that, to look at both sides of the A1M to bring in that western arc. Whether we redrew our site search area or not, probably not that diligent in re-referencing site search areas.
So how much is a new crematorium? I think it's £6 million was the figure quoted by Mr.
Yeah, anywhere between £6 and £8 million.
Right. So a £6 million investment, you're not diligent enough to draw a plan of your wider search area?
No, not in terms of the wider search area. Once we get a site which we think will work, then that's when we get into the detailed financial appraisal, and then we're into the detailed post-sector analysis of deaths, historical death rates, and then we go and visit the surrounding crematoria, look at the crematoria volumes, and also if we can access our own funeral director data, we bring that on board. So we do a very, very detailed micro level, but we might look at 100, 200 sites in a given year, and we might bring forward 2 or 3 new planning applications. You know, that's the volume of sites that we look at. But once we get a site which we think is viable, then there's a whole detailed analysis that goes underneath that to justify the financial appraisal.
But just so we're clear, the only plan with a site area on it mandated by Dignity is this one. It's Appendix 5, north of Doncaster. You aren't able to point to another one?
No.
No, okay.
That's correct.
And then if we scroll back in this document to where Mr. Williams, and again, please, if these are questions for Mr. Williams, then please tell me, and obviously I want to ask the right person. I don't want to.
No, I'm happy to look at Mr. Williams' document, but obviously he's.
No, it depends on the questions, I suppose.
What page are we looking at now? Sorry.
Figure 4 on page 54.
54, yeah.
And that's where we see the sites taken forward as potential sites, all to the north and northeast of Doncaster. Yes.
Yeah.
So again, nothing there that says you looked at anything to the west.
No, as I understood it, it's a question from Mr. Williams that they did look to the west of the A1M, but there was no potential sites there.
Right, we'll ask Mr. Williams then about that.
Yeah.
If we can go back then, please, to your section 3.
Are we finished with that document?
Yes, we're finished with that document now. We can go back to section 3 of your proof.
Yeah.
And this is about site selection and choice. And a point you brought up, you see that at the heading of the section, site selection and choice, and a point you brought up in chief. We find on page 13 at the bottom 4 paragraphs. Remember you were talking about Lancaster and Morecambe and Beetham Hall.
Beetham Hall, yeah.
Beetham, well, as someone who knows the area very well, it's Beetham.
I was calling it Beetham. I'm not going to argue with someone from Lancaster.
The point you're making in this paragraph is that your site in Lancaster and Morecambe was able to go to 60-minute slots once Beetham Hall had opened. Yes?
Yes.
And that you saw something similar happen in Kettering Council's owned crematorium once the new one had opened at Wellingborough.
Yeah.
And you consider that moving from 45-minute to 60-minute slots is a benefit? Yes,
it's a qualitative benefit.
Would you consider it to be a significant qualitative benefit?
I would add it's a material benefit. Whether it's significant, I struggle with the weight attached to significant. I would say it's a material benefit.
A material benefit. Where we'll deal with weights with Mr. Mr. Williams.
And I would add for two reasons. Firstly, every new crematoria, and I keep saying every new crematoria operating in the UK is opening, as I believe. I can't think of any that haven't opened on 60-minute slots. So to be qualitative equivalent, you would have to offer a similar level of slot length through there. So it is material in operating a qualitative, not better, but a better experience than was there with a 45-minute slot, and also being, this is my word, comparable with a new build opening that is offering 60-minute slots.
And that we spent a bit of time this morning with Mr. Hodgson about the 80% practical core capacity point, and I think we're all broadly on the same page. That above 80%, it becomes more challenging to deliver a qualitative or a qualitative experience. Over 80%, it gets more difficult.
I'm sorry.
It's not impossible.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, not necessarily. I just want to understand exactly where we are. Not necessarily impossible, but obviously, the more over 80% you are, the harder it will become. Yes.
Yes.
Right. One of the point you make at paragraph 3.24 is that I would add that if permitted, the appeal scheme would, by relieving pressure at Rose Hill, Barnsley and Pontefract, allow these crematoria to enhance their own qualitative offer, for example, by increasing their service slots from 40 minutes to 60 minutes, notwithstanding the existence of the Barnby Done scheme. So there you're saying that one of the benefits we should look at for your scheme is its ability to relieve the Western Arc to the point where qualitative improvements can be made.
I think the point I'm trying to make there, I'm just looking at the wording, is that it would give those sites the potential to look at providing 60-minute slots.
The potential, okay. And if it doesn't provide the potential to offer 60-minute slots, then obviously that would not be a benefit of your scheme, would it?
No, but I think it would also allow consumers choice, especially in that Western Arc of Rotherham, Barnsley and Pontefract, in terms of rather than having to wait 3 weeks, which our analysis suggests is the waiting time at those crematoria, is to allow people a choice to have a 60-minute service, albeit they will sacrifice some journey time to the Brodsworth facility.
And that's where there is a degree, as I think everybody said so far, of balance.
Yeah, and that's the invisible hand, and that's bereaved families making choices of waiting a week for, let's say, a Friday afternoon 1 o'clock slot, or having a sooner Friday afternoon 1 o'clock slot.
Because, for example, at Rotherham, there's nothing to stop you offering 1 hour cremation slots, is there?
No, well, there is two things.
Except you would increase the wait.
Sorry?
You would increase the wait. Yes.
We would increase the wait, and also we would have to get agreement from the local authority to do that, because obviously we'll manage those facilities on behalf of Rotherham Borough Council, and they're more attuned to those qualitative and quantitative benefits as well. So we're not wholly masters of our own destiny in Rotherham, because we manage that site on behalf of Rotherham Metropolitan Borough Council. So we wouldn't have the freedom that we saw at Lancaster and Morecambe, where we own that site and we're a freeholder, and we can take that decision on a quantitative and qualitative basis.
Very well, thank you. The letters from funeral directors in your Appendix 3.
Yeah.
Now, very straightforwardly, you say that they're all dignity owned.
Yeah, I think we make that clear.
Yes. So dignity. So what was the genesis of these letters? How do they come about? Do you tell these funeral directors to write in?
Yeah, we mentioned we were looking at developing a crematoria in the area. So we look at our existing funeral directors, and we ask them to jot down their thoughts on any potential shortfalls they see in the area.
Are they owned by Dignity to the extent that they are employees?
Yes.
So the authors of the letters are employees.
Yes.
Thank you. Direct and hybrid cremations. You gave some fairly lengthy answers to my learned friend in Chief about direct and hybrid cremations. I'm just wondering if you could point me to where in your brief I can find that lengthy explanation about direct and hybrid cremations.
I don't actually cover it in my proof. This is the first time we've come across it at an inquiry. Also, the lengthy answers, because as I said, I still think it's a nascent market. It's grown off the back of being new, and as numerous evidence has given that there's a huge amount of marketing and spend going into these products. And again, I'm giving lengthy answers because it's not as mature and not as settled as other parts of the cremation and funeral industry.
I mean, say it's the first time you've come across it at an inquiry. It was obviously a point of dispute for this inquiry, and indeed it's dealt with to some extent in Mr. Best's evidence. But I think Mr. Best says he relies on your view of direct cremations.
Yes, we had lengthy discussions about direct cremation. I struggle with what a direct cremation is, what the defined term of direct cremation is. Is it an unattended digital only offering, or is it, as we perceive it, attended and intimate funerals and family-led funerals, and what reaches up into the realms of a full service funeral?
So you said there's a range that you offer. One,
Yeah.
which is a let's say a straightforward direct cremation as we would understand it, in that
we call it an unattended direct cremation.
Unattended cremation. Then there are the other two options which you covered in Chief, and these don't involve the cortege arriving, which must mean that it can occupy a smaller slot at the crematorium, because you don't run the risk of hearses arriving and leaving at the same time, for example.
Yeah, it's hard because you can argue that the 5-10 minutes of the hearse arriving and leaving, but the chapel is booked out for the same amount of time. So if we're running 45 minutes, the family have access to the whole, probably around 40 minutes to have the service. And if it's a 60-minute slot length, they're probably around the 45-50 minutes through there from that respect. So in terms of demand and capability, there's no difference in our world from a direct attended cremation in the chapel at 1 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, as opposed to a full service funeral in the chapel at 1 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. The only difference is you won't get the funeral cortege, the hearse, the limo, and maybe some family cars following. But the capacity is exactly the same. There's someone occupying the chapel time during that, and they can take 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes. It's their choice how long that service lasts.
So do you offer flexibility for how long people can book the chapel?
No, we're similar to all, and we had this, I'm laughing because we had this discussion with the CMA. Similar to all operators, as far as I'm aware, we offer fixed chapel times throughout the day, and we had discussions with the CMA. Said, well, why don't you flex it? Why don't you give people a 20-minute chapel time, a 30-minute chapel time, a 45-minute chapel time, a 60-minute chapel time, and let them book whatever they want during the day? And our primary response to that was the complications and the managing of the flow of funerals, and people perhaps booking a shorter slot and then impacting on people with follow-up slots. So I believe the industry, as far as I'm aware, and again, I'm not fully aware what everyone offers, that most of us have what we call a fixed diary time, which is either mandated at 45 minutes or 60 minutes or 40 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever the provider requires of it.
So you do offer shorter chapel times. You do offer 30 minutes. If that's
yes, just purely off the off-peak 9 and 9:30, but that's purely at those. You cannot book 30 minutes at 1 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. No. You have to take the out slot, but you can have a 9 or a 9:30 as a 30-minute slot.
If you just bear with me for a moment.
No worries.
So do you have Mr. Mitchell's late evidence in front of you, please?
Bear with me.
And it's figure 3.
I struggle to find this one. Is it in the proofs of evidence?
So no, it's the evidence which came in.
The late. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
The follow-on submission.
The late evidence that spoiled Mr. Village's Sunday lunch unintentionally. Do you have the table? It's on page 8 of 11, paragraph 4.13.
Yeah, I've got a hard copy. And you were looking at table
Paragraph 4.13 on page 8 of 11. It's the figure 3. Figure 3.
3D crematoria upon Rosa.
No, Mr. Lathbury. Figure 3.
Sorry.
Page 8 of 11.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into the meat and bones of this, because we'll do that no doubt with Mr. Best tomorrow morning. But just looking at the way that those days are structured, looking at the time on the left or the right, with direct cremations earlier, a shorter slot, so there's two 45-minute slots in 1 and 2 on the column on the right, and then hour-long slots later on. That would be a model which, on your approach to direct cremations, would be acceptable.
No, as I say, we would probably have 2 what we call unattended drop-off slots before 9 a.m. and then we have a 9 and a 9:30 as reduced, let's call them reduced fee slots, and then we'd get into the hour services, the 10, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4.
But in terms of offering a quality, in your view, a qualitative or an acceptable quality service, the direct cremations early on, 1 or 2 reduced fee at 9 and 9:30, and then into the 1 hour slots would be an acceptable qualitative offering.
Yes, that's what we would think was a qualitative offering, and that would be an improvement over the 45-minute slot length.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Lathbury. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Robson. Mr. Barrett, would you like to commence your cross-examination?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Lathbury.
Good afternoon, Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Lathbury, can I begin with hopefully some questions which we can agree? The Barnby Dunn proposal that has been approved would represent a modern state-of-the-art facility, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think Memoria, as I said, builds new build, modern facilities.
And in qualitative terms, it would be indistinguishable from the appeal proposal.
It would be a subjective view. I think, and I would say this, I think Dignity Crematoria are more architecturally uniquely designed. I would say we would look to lay it out, but for a bereaved family, they would be difficult to discern the difference between the 2 facilities.
Thank you very much. It will improve choice and competition in the Doncaster area.
Yes, it would offer more choice for people within a 30-minute drive time of the existing Rosa crematorium.
And in view of the fact that we've just discussed a few matters, introduce that qualitative element that the original case of your clients at the time it submitted its planning application wasn't present.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be a start on offering the choice and the qualitative element. We also think it would poorly serve the people to the west of Doncaster and would have little or marginal impact on the Western Arc, as we describe it, of Rotherham, Barnsley and Pontefract.
I thought that was primarily a matter for Mr. Best, but I'm happy to take it up with you if you wanted to discuss.
I think the detail of that is with Mr. Best. I think what we would see is an extension of the choice and the service offering to include those crematoria, which I don't think Barnby Dun would help.
In terms of distance, there can't be any dispute here. The two sites are about 6 miles apart, 10 kilometres or thereabouts as the crow flies.
Yeah.
One of the consequences of the Barnby Dun site becoming operational, it will meet a need to reduce capacity levels at Rose Hill and should enable the quality of Rose Hill to be improved, the quality of the offer at Rose Hill to be improved.
Yes, I think that the introduction of the modern crematoria would help that. But obviously, against that, and I think as Mr. Hodgson pointed out, is evidence at 9.18 accepted that there might be a need for 1 or 2 crematoria in the area.
As a consequence, therefore, and I think the inspector can take this on board from an operator such as yourself, the Barnby Dun scheme, once operational, the capacity pressure at Rose Hill will be significantly reduced, won't it?
Yes, it will be reduced.
I added the word significantly. I wasn't being sneaky, Mr. Lathbury. I was hoping you would agree it.
I admitted the word significantly and went with reduced.
It won't be insignificantly reduced, will it, Mr. Lathbury?
No, there will be a reduction.
Yes, so it's not very hard to agree the proposition I've just put to you then, is it?
No,
it will be significant.
I think the weight to insignificant or significant, there will be a reduction. Whether that is significant or insignificant is something that a planning professional will have to attach weight to and consider the merits of that.
So the big consequence that one can readily appreciate following the approval and implementation of my client's scheme is that there will be a consequential qualitative improvement in the offer to the north of Doncaster at the very least.
Yes, and to the north of Doncaster, there will be more choice, and potentially Rose Hill can up its qualitative offering by moving to our service levels.
One further matter, with the introduction of the Memoria scheme, the case that local crematoria are old and outdated cannot any longer be credibly maintained, can it?
I think if you divide local crematoria by Rose Hill itself, it'd still be old and outdated. Its qualitative offering will be 1 hour service times. If you extend that to Rotherham, which we operate, and Barnsley and Pontefract, I still think you have an arc of 4 old and outdated crematoria, one of which Rotherham we have significantly invested in and is a significant improvement, and one of which Rose Hill may have the potential to increase qualitatively. But I think, as Mr. Mitchell touched on in his proof of evidence, and I would second that, and we've done what we can at Rotherham, there is only so much you can do with the existing infrastructure due to the limitations of the site constraint, the age of the buildings, and the layout of the car park and the flow of the sites. And I think only a new build, such as Barnby Dun, such as Brodsworth, are able to offer that modern, up-to-date operating experience.
Let me try and break my question into 2 components. It will probably be easier. At the time that the Dignity formulated its planning application, the local crematoria consisted of sites that had been developed in the 50s and early 60s and were seen and were described in these terms as being old and outdated facilities.
Yes.
Once the Memoria scheme is up and running, that case for all the crematoria in the area as being old and outdated cannot be maintained, can it?
No, not all the crematoria. There'll be 4 old and outdated crematoria and 1 new one.
Yeah. Let me just deal with one broad point. I will come back to this point, I suspect, with Mr. Best in due course. Whilst the Western Arc sites have qualitative qualitative issues arising from the capacity pressure were the appeal scheme itself, when one considers the communities and the population served by the Western Ark Crematorium, is 30 minutes plus to the appeal site, isn't it?
Yes.
The geographic point is quite simply this. Ironically, all the Western Ark crematoria serve communities and a population that is substantially to the west of those crematoria.
Yes, as I keep coming back to my proof of evidence, we look at the 30-minute kind of drive time, but it is in the context, and I'm going to go back to the point I made earlier. It is in the context of asking people to wait up to 3 weeks for a preferred service slot at an older, outdated facility, and that is the context of which we believe that rebalancing will take place, and people will have a choice either to wait another 10, 7, 5 days, or drive 20, 30 minutes to a modern facility and get a more timely and more beneficial service.
I promise in due course rebalancing will be the subject matter of some discussion before the inspector, whether she likes it or not. But you and I will agree, almost at an anecdotal level, but geographically accurate. The communities and the population at Barnsley, Rotherham and Pontefract, in short, would effectively have to drive past the nearest crematoria serving those locations to drive to the proposal, the dignity proposal at Brodsworth.
Yeah, I think people to the west of those crematoria would have to drive past those crematoria, but people directed to the east of those crematoria would not have to drive past those crematoria.
Okay, the CMA report that Mr. Village and yourself discussed some little time ago now, can I ask you to take it up? It's core document E2.
Yeah, I've got that open.
Just let me catch up with you.
Yeah, sorry, I left it open because it's such a beast.
No need to apologise. I understand Mr. Village is going on holiday, so perhaps this is in his suitcase is his holiday reading. It looks to me like a real page turner, but Torremolinos reading. If we go to E2, you described it in quite. Let me try and get the terms right, because I thought it was quite interesting what you said. You described it as a consumer champion document. Is that right?
Yes, I said the CMA were representing the consumer and championing the cause of the consumer, and that, as I understand it, was the CMA's position. It wasn't representing individual private operators. It wasn't representing local authorities. It was representing the consumer. That's my understanding of the CMA brief.
Sorry to stop across you. You described it as a broad and detailed investigation on behalf of the consumer.
Yes.
And it was a very detailed reference point for the market, so the inspector can look to it to give her a clear and independent view of how the market operates. I think
you can use it as a overview of the market, in that everyone was submitted evidence there. I think I said in respect to Memorial and to Dignity, not every submission and not every point we were trying to make, and obviously Dignity were making points from Dignity's market perspective, Memorial were making points from Memorial's market perspective. I would say that overall it represents a broad brush of the market, but not everyone's individual points finally made it into the final decision report, and there were topics in there that we disagreed with, and there was topics in there that we agreed with.
Of course. There was no criticism, as I have read it, of Memoria or their participation in this process, or the quality of the information provided by them.
No, I don't think there was. I don't think there was any criticism of any party who submitted to the CMA, as far as I can remember. So neither Dignity nor Co-op or Westerly or local authorities or anyone, I don't think anyone was directly accused or targeted for not providing sufficient or qualitative relevant data.
Okay, can I ask you to go to page 316 of the document, madam? If you have the PDF file and you import 319, getting a bit of feedback. I don't know if that's me or somebody else. That goes to the document, that's to the page that I want.
Yeah, 6188, 6.1.
Yes, that's right.
That's the scariest
Conclusions on how crematoria compete at the bottom of that page, which is 6190. Do you have that?
Yeah, 6190.
Because these are matters that ultimately feed into the commercial assessment and the commercial realism of the assessment made by in support of this case. Local proximity and familiarity are important to customers in choosing a crematorium. The decision-making process for customers in choosing a crematorium therefore appears to be relatively straightforward. The large majority of customers use the closest crematorium or one they are familiar with and do not compare alternatives. As a statement of how the market was performing in December, I think 2020, the date of this report, do you agree with that?
No, and that conclusion is contrary. There was two pieces that we submitted a piece of evidence, which what we did is across the Dignity crematoria portfolio, we used individual geocoded cremations, i.e. so down to the individual cremations that were taken at our sites. We gave the CMA evidence, and I think it might be referenced earlier in the report, and excuse me, I'll have to drag out the reference, that 30% of Dignity cremations came from a geocoded location that was closer to another crematoria operator. And I believe that Westerly submitted evidence pretty similar, that 20 to 30% of their cremations came from individuals who were located closer to another crematorium. So I would argue that that conclusion didn't attach much weight to those submissions, which were pretty in line with each other from both Dignity and Westerly.
It would seem that the CMA therefore didn't accept the point made by Dignity and the other competitor.
Yeah, the CMA, for whatever reason, I think they quoted that evidence. Sorry, I lost you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lathbury. Every now and again, your voice disappears. It may be, I don't think it's my laptop because it was working fine. I don't know if there's a problem. Has anybody else experienced that problem? No?
You broke up on me a little bit just before there, Mr. Barrett.
Well,
your voice broke up a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I lost Mr. Barrett there.
Okay, I apologise for that. Yeah, right, well, I will try again, Mr. Lathbury.
Yeah.
On that particular point, therefore, the CMA doesn't seem to have accepted your evidence or that of Westerly.
I think they accepted our evidence. I think they actually quoted our evidence in the main body report. And forgive me, I can't remember the reference for my life.
No,
but they reached a conclusion that they did not think that was material, and they reached a different conclusion, which comes back to my point that we submitted a lot of detailed evidence, some of which was referenced in the report, some of which wasn't, some of which obviously was referenced and redacted because it was commercially sensitive, but they arrived at a set of conclusions which were not in line with Dignity or Westerly or any another. But overall, in terms of the provision of choice and the remedies proposed, the CMA represented a robust piece of analysis and a piece of evidence. And I'm not agreeing with every single conclusion that came out of that report, but there's a lot of detailed analysis and a lot of comparative information in that report, which led to the formulation of those conclusions. And the CMA arrived at a different destination than ourselves and the Westerly Group were indicating.
Will you go to paragraph 6.195, because it's another conclusion that they've come to, because this is all under the heading of their conclusions on how crematoria compete. And I want to put this to you. I'll read it out just in case not everybody has it in front of them. private crematoria, which are typically newer than their local authority rivals, are able to differentiate themselves through their newer buildings, facilities and grounds, and attract a proportion of customers for whom these factors could be important and may have otherwise used a closer local authority alternative, although some smaller funeral directors and rival crematorium operators have noted the lack of investment at some of the private crematoria. These words, based on our analysis, the proportion of customers that private crematoria may be able to attract from further afield based on a superior offering compared with local authorities crematoria is on average relatively limited and lower than the 3 largest private crematorium operators have argued. It's a very clear conclusion, and a conclusion that is contrary to operators, including my client. It was a plague on all your houses conclusion, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you took the words out of my mouth. That is contrary to the evidence that we provided. I wasn't privy to your client's evidence, and where it was stated, I think that was contrary to the evidence provided by Westley.
Can I ask you to go to paragraph 6100? I know we're going back earlier, but it's the way that we present the evidence. 6100.
Yeah.
And this is an analysis of out of area customers. Madam, you'll see that from the heading above 6.98 on page 274. And out of area customers are defined, and I'm quite happy to take you to it, Mr. Lathbury, but I'm sure you this is your copy is a well thumbed copy of this, I've no doubt. Out of area customers that
I've not been brave enough to print it out. I've got to admit, I only carry around an electronic copy available at all hours of the day.
It's probably on your Kindle, your holiday reading there. It's out
definitely
of
not. Definitely not.
Out of area means, according to the definition provided, customers that would have a closer alternative. Okay, Madam, for your note, I think that's at paragraph 6.98 that we've just looked at. Dignity Memoria Westley submitted that with regard to each of their crematoria, there are customers who would have a closer alternative out of area customers. You see that definition. Now, if you go to the paragraph that I initially referred to, 6100, says this, as a framework for our assessment, the proportion of out of area customers and its implications in terms of competition between crematoria on the basis of price or quality, we note 2 points. Both points suggest that the extent to which private crematorium operators attract out of area customers will overstate the extent to which private crematoria compete for marginal customers. Subparagraph A, all crematoria, regardless of whether they are operated by a private operator or a local authority, seem to attract a proportion of out of area customers. As noted in paragraph 6.25, 14% of respondents to the Market Investigation Consumer Survey, and let me just pause there, that was the consumer survey prepared for the CMA, wasn't it? It's not a comment of evidence submitted to it by any of the operators.
Yes, that was a consumer survey submitted by the CMA, and we raised doubts over the volume and the number of respondents to that survey. And they again used their surveys in preference to anything. We didn't have any detailed surveys, but I know Westley Group submitted some survey data. The CMA tended to rely on their own internal data. Again, they're the consumer champion, and maybe that's where they were coming from.
And the next sentence, the evidence set out in table 15 of that survey, effectively, shows that there are that there are wide range of reasons, often unrelated to quality or price, why customers may use a crematorium that is not their closest.
Yeah.
The point is that operates both ways, doesn't it? There will be cases where I may have, as a potential customer, a brand spanking new state-of-the-art facility built by Dignity or Memoria or Westley, but I'm not going to use that because My family consistently over the years have used the crematoria down the road. Beyond it, whole range of reasons.
I think there's two elements in response to that. Yes, and it's funny as you read. I'm reading paragraph 8, and that says rebalancing to me. There is always a dynamic in the market. Consumers are always looking there, and it is the weight of offering in that dynamic. As a local authority crematorial, I may have that 1 p.m. on a Friday afternoon slot that the consumer desires, but it's more likely that a lower volume modern crematoria has more slots available and more times of the day. But I am not saying, and I don't think Mr. Best will say, that rebalancing flows one way, because if it's flowing one way, it can't be balancing. Rebalancing ebbs and flows between crematoria. As one crematoria gets busy, it reaches capacity, offers less choice, and by the very nature of the invisible hand of bereaved families making decisions, that will flow back to other crematoria operators. The point, I think, the second point is the evidence we suggested is that Westerly and Dignity, and I can only rely on the data we supplied, suggested that that number was around 30%. It certainly was 30% from the Dignity data, and I recollect it was 20 to 30% from the Westerly data. But that is rebalancing in action.
Sorry, Mr. Lathbury, have you finished your answer? I'm sorry. I interrupted.
There's a bit of a lag, sorry. It's just.
Can I ask you to page 296?
Is that electronic 296?
No, 299 electronic.
Sorry. Yeah.
And there's a heading just immediately above 6144, so that the inspector knows where we are in the document. It's the summary of evidence and analysis in relation to out of area customers. It's another plague on all your houses point, because 6144, Dignity, Westerly and Memoria argued that customers who have a closer alternative crematorium choose their crematoria over closer alternatives because of their superior offering and better value for money, and without these customers their crematoria would not be profitable. Now, I'm not interested in that last point about profitability, but I'm interested in 6.146 on the basis that the CMA have said, we have assessed for each type of crematorium operator the proportion of their customers that use their crematoria but have a closer alternative. We have found that a material proportion of customers at both private and local authority crematoria are from out of area, which indicates that not all out of area customers at private crematoria are customers who chose a private crematorium because of any superior offering or better value for money relative to the customer's closest alternative. And these words, I think, that might be relevant for the discussion we'll have in due course with Mr. Best. It is also relevant that flows occur in both directions between local authority and private crematoria, and between crematoria of the same type. Based on our findings, we consider that the proportion of private crematoria customers that choose private crematoria on the basis of price or quality, and may be considered to be marginal, is relatively limited and lower than the proportions indicated by Dignity, Westerly and Memoria. We note that this conclusion is consistent with our findings from the market investigation survey that we discussed a moment ago, that showed 14% of customers across all crematoria chose one which was not their closest, and this decision is often unrelated to price or quality. For 6147, we have found that across crematorium operators, there is a high degree of variation in the proportions of customers that they attract from out of area. The evidence shows that there are a range of geographic and local factors unrelated to competition that mean people may not use their closest crematorium and can drive these variations. We have found that the proportions of out of area customers of private crematoria increase as slot lengths are longer and fees are lower, the point that you were making. But these relationships are not strong. The proportions of private crematoria customers who are from out of area varies widely, and this is the case regardless of whether the nearest rival is a local authority crematorium or another private crematorium. In view of the arguments that private crematoria have put forward about their quality being higher than that of local authority crematoria, we might expect that private crematoria may attract higher proportions of out-of-area customers when their nearest rival is a local authority crematorium. However, we do not find this to be the case. Now, I'm sorry that that was a long recitation, but basically it's the point that quality is not necessarily the driving force that you, in your case, have developed before this inspector, is it?
No, and as I said, we supplied actual data, actual performance data, where performance is the wrong word, actual bereavement data from the deceased, which indicated that 30% of people using the dignity crematoria were coming from outer areas. Again, I'd stress Westley used 20 to 30%. And they're comparing that to survey data. So the way, as we're all aware, the way people behave in the real world is sometimes different from the way people behave in the surveyed world. And also, the thing is, we didn't provide evidence of, and it's difficult for us to do the causal link, is why those 30% who are choosing to use a dignity crematorium as opposed to a more local one are choosing that. Is it availability of the slots? Is it slot length? Is it car parking on site? Is it traffic? Is it geographical location? That is the invisible hand. That is the missing link, which we believe is a combination of all those factors.
Okay. Finally, there was a discussion on the planning process. I'm going to ask you to go to page 146, but let me preface my question by this. One of the options that was available, I suppose, to the CMA in making its recommendations was that the planning process should be made easier because crematoria have exacting locational requirements that necessarily mean that quite often they have to be located in open countryside and in many instances greenbelt. That was an option, wasn't it, for the CMA?
Yes.
And they didn't make that recommendation, did they?
No, they didn't make that recommendation.
There was no liberalisation, if I can use that expression, of the planning system to accommodate the special needs of crematoria.
No, and I think my takeaway from, as I said right at the beginning, that the CMA are restricted under the Enterprise Act of the things they can take direct action on in terms of orders they can lawfully make and lawfully enforce. There are other areas where they would have to lean into. I'm not an expert on planning law, but they'd have to lean into Parliament to get changes through the planning system or the planning law, or they would make changes to the regulatory environment of crematoria or funeral directors. My belief is, and this is why we believe the CMA will come back to this, they were cut short by the unfortunate events of 2020, and therefore they leaned upon the orders they could make with a regime that said we are going to continue to monitor the funeral markets and the crematory markets and see how they go forward on the basis of these remedies, and if there are further needs to undertake another market investigation, then we will do that.
Now, can I ask you, you see the heading planning process immediately above 4.63. Can I draw your attention to 4.65, bearing in mind this is December 2020 information, or the final report is December 2020.
Yeah.
4.65, crematorium operators have to prove a need for a new crematorium to planning authorities, whilst local planning authorities will determine each planning application on its own specific facts. Some planning decisions in England and Wales have defined the level of quantitative and qualitative need which providers should show as part of their planning application. And the first is quantitative need.
Yeah.
Considered to be the number of people who will be closer to the new crematorium compared with any other. Recent appeal decisions have defined an area to have a quantitative need where there will be 136,000 to 171,000 people for whom the new crematorium will be closest. You will be aware that my clients, and obviously this will be discussed with Mr. Best, have calculated that that figure in the appeal case would be about 120,000.
Yes.
And then the qualitative need, is typically the number of people who will now have less than a 30-minute cortege drive time to the crematorium, who used to have a greater than 30-minute cortege drive time, although other factors such as waiting times have also been considered by planning authorities. Recent decisions have considered a qualitative need exists, where there will be 59,000 to 95,000 people who will, for the first time, have a crematorium within a 30-minute cortege drive time. And again, my client's calculation, Mr. Hodgson's calculation, is that the figure inputted here would be of the order of 22,000. You'll have seen that in Mr. Hodgson's evidence.
But I think all the CMA are doing there are describing the background to some historical planning decisions.
But do you agree?
The backdrop of suggesting that they're seeking to have more competition and more choice within both 30-minute and 40-minute drive time areas.
It's interesting, nevertheless, that that was a piece of evidence that the CMA lighted upon. And do you agree that it may be a useful touchstone, not a determining factor, but a useful touchstone is how I'm putting it to you, for the inspector to gauge both quantitative and qualitative need in this case? Not determined, but a touchstone.
I disagree as a touchstone. As a reference point, giving people 50, 60, 120,000 the choice of having one or two crematoria is a pretty poor benchmark in terms of my view of the planning process. The planning process should be enabling choice, not saying you have one crematoria within a 30-minute drive time, therefore that is your lot, or you have just two crematoria within that drive time. And I think that reiteration of the existing planning regime goes against the evidence the CMA was trying to garner about the number of crematoria that have competing crematoria, again within a 30-minute drive time and a 40-minute cortege drive time. So I should say cortege.
Can you direct me, Mr. Lathbury, to that second, the subparagraph B point in the appellant's evidence, where an attempt is made to quantify the number of people that would, for the first time, be within 30-minute cortege drive time?
Sorry,
Where in the appellant's evidence will I find that? It's obviously not in yours. I couldn't find it in Mr. Best's. It may be that's a function of me, not you, but I was hoping that you could assist me with that. No?
I think that would be Mr. Best's evidence. It's okay. As I say, it's not a metric we use. As we touched on with Mr. Hodgson, our key metric is we're not so focused on population, because population have different mortality rates and the aging of those populations. Our primarily focus is on providing a service to the bereaved, and as a consequence of being bereaved, there must be deaths, so we tend to focus on death data as a more relevant metric.
Two final matters. First of all, the 85% increase in cremation, or increase to 85% cremation rate. As I understand how you were expressing it to Mr. Village, that was the ceiling that you considered appropriate, taking into account all the factors that both Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Hodgson discussed as well.
No, that's incorrect. I sit down with Jonathan, Mr. Best, and we discuss where we believe cremation rates will rise. We run various models internally into Dignity, suggesting that cremation rates may rise above 85%, so that's a base level. We run models up to 90%. But obviously, the further you go up there, then you start to hit the boundaries between not only cremation, but into people who bought pre-existing burial plots and traditional burial grounds, and also into any religious affinities that are in the area. And I think Mr. Best is providing further evidence because religious affinities change over the country. There's not a uniform distribution of deaths through them.
I think what we can agree is that it is inconceivable that it will reach 100%.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any country. I think Japan has one of the highest rates at about 99.9%. But I find it inconceivable in the UK with the religious affinities, and also there is a tradition of burial, and we offer burial grounds at a number of our crematoria, that it will reach 100%. It is conceivable it will reach 90%, and it is more than likely that it will reach 85%.
Okay, right, well, I think we've exhausted that debate. I want to discuss direct cremation rates at the moment. Let me take up one issue which you've seen in your examination in chief have not to appreciate. I'm sorry.
Going on to a different topic, it might be a good moment to have a break.
Mr. Village, can I just remind you to come through me if you want to speak, please?
So I was actually, madam. Sorry, I thought I'd pressed my hand up. I was going to ask if we're going on to a different topic.
Well,
it'd be a good moment for a break.
Mr. Barrett, how long do you think you'll be?
I'm sorry, I was talking over you, madam. I do apologise. I think I'll be something in the order of 5 to 10 minutes because it's my last point on direct cremation. If I'm quite happy to break here and come back, or if you would prefer, let me finish and then ask your questions and Mr. Village.
I think it would seem sensible to continue if you've only got 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you.
Ms. Lathbury, the final point I'm going to discuss with you is direct cremations. One of the points that seemed to have been not appreciated, perhaps when you were giving your examination in chief, was that the rate that Memoria have currently achieved is 28%. They're not using their own figure. Mr. Hodgson's judgment is one of 20% for the future figure, isn't it? 2033.
Well, it comes back. The one defining area of difference, we are not using any 2020 data whatsoever. We do not, Dignity do not use any 2020 data. My understanding was the 28% was based on 2020 data. I have no agreement whatsoever with anyone running off 2020 data.
No.
And it's very rarely no absolute, but that's an absolute point for Dignity.
If one looks at the market, you explained in your evidence in chief that Westerly have just introduced a new product to the market. You explained that your own model has changed somewhat. It's not referred to in your evidence, but this shorter slot time, you are recalibrating the offer that existed at the time of this planning application to provide a greater opportunity, range and choice for those who wished a more modest, less time-consuming service, correct?
Yeah, I think there was two elements to that. When we initially offered direct cremation, our first volumes coming through in 2017, they were purely unattended. Sorry, I shouldn't use purely. They were strictly unattended direct cremations. We recognised there was a need for people who wanted to attend the services, and there's a debate within the funeral industry, and I'm not going to get into it here, but there's debate in the funeral industry about the psychological impact of not attending that. So we offered an intimate funeral at the 9 and 9:30 slots to utilise an off-peak slot and to help with demand at crematorium. But we also brought in what we call the family-led funeral. I shouldn't use the word funeral. Family-led direct cremation, which is, as far as the crematory is concerned, is a full-service cremation, but you do not have the services of a funeral director. You do not have the services of a hearse and limousine and a cortege to it. So I think direct cremation is a term that's bandied about, but there are different operators within the direct cremation market is probably the articulation I'm trying to grasp for, and people can focus, as pure cremations do, on the unattended side, although they do offer attended services now, or you can tailor your offering on the more simple, basic, limited, attended direct cremations at various points, but they have different implications for the demand on cremation slots.
I want to see where we're going with the evidence overall. Direct cremations was an issue that everybody agreed in the Statement of Common Ground ought to be deducted from the primary slot cremations because they didn't materially impact upon capacity, did they?
Unattended direct cremations.
Yes. If I go to Mr. Best's evidence, his main proof of evidence, not his rebuttal, and go to paragraph 7.
I suggest you talk to Mr. Best about his evidence. I'm not.
No, he's talking about your evidence at this paragraph. That's why I'm taking you to it.
Okay, I'll follow you there. Bear with me a second.
713 let me get the page number for you. Page 37, if you've got the hard copy. And actually, Mr. Best's PDF copy, I think, is the same page number.
Just bear with me. Is that his main proof of evidence?
It's the main proof, not rebuttal.
Yeah, the main proof, sorry. Bear with me.
Tell me when you're there.
Yeah, it's just loading up. Apologies for the it's a limited capacity for documents to be open. Yeah. And you were looking at page?
Paragraph 713 of his evidence, page 37, right at the bottom of page 37.
What paragraph reference was that, sorry?
713, the very bottom of the page.
Bear with me. 7.113.
Yeah, 7.13. Now, dignity offer direct cremations, which it defines as essentially unattended, correct?
Yes.
The experience of dignity, it goes on to say, is that about 20% of direct cremations involve a limited number of people in attendance, but without a service, which are hybrid.
Yes.
A cremation that is bereft of a service is not needing the utilisation of a full hour slot, is it?
If I think the wording on that is a bit strange. I think where, and it's one for Mr. Best, I think without a service should read without a funeral service, i.e. without the provision of the hearse and limousine, because the 20% is what I believe refers to as people in attendance.
There's then a reference to the
code. 20% of those involve a limited number of people in attendance. So if there are people in attendance, they have to be in the chapel and they have to be given an allocation of time, either 30 minutes at the 9 or 9:30 or the full hour during the day.
Well, I'm looking at the words, they're not mine, yeah. Mr. Best, but without a service. You know, there may be a few words spoken, but it's not going to demand a full 60-minute service, would it?
If it's a dignity, simplicity, family-led service, or and low-cost funerals, memorial have a similar type of service. Some of those are unrestricted, whatever time slot the crematorium operates at, 45, 60 minutes, 40 minutes. And as a crematorium operator and as demand for those slots, whether that funeral is using that slot without a funeral director and without a hearse or without a limousine is exactly the same as if they were using that 60, 45, 40-minute slot with a hearse, with a limousine, with the proviso that they probably have more time in the chapel because they're not waiting for the hearse and limousine to arrive, because the deceased should always be arriving at the crematorium before.
And the final point on this paragraph is that it says you explain in your evidence the company's expectations on the level of future direct and hybrid cremations, but you don't, do you?
No. And I think we hit the buffer that Memorial don't seem to recognise. The market was in turmoil, so we stopped the jumping off point in 2019.
But let's be absolutely clear on it. Dignity and indeed the other major operators are increasing their advertising costs and promotional material to make this service available to the public. Yeah,
absolutely, and the same with any type of service. There'll be two elements to it. People will want those services to come to their crematorium. Will that increase the growth of direct cremations disproportionately? We shall see. Or will that be existing providers making sure that they have a competitive toehold and a competitive position in this market? Because the history of Dignity was pure cremation started up. That was a direct challenge. It was unattended direct cremation. I think Memorial then followed with a low-cost funeral proposition. we followed in 2017 with our simplicity proposition, and then the final piece in the major jigsaw was Westerly launching their proposition, I believe in September, October this year.
Thank you very much.
That will people reclaiming those services to their crematorial or growing the market remains to be seen. That's the unknown. That's the unknown on that.
Thank you, Mr. Lathbury. Thank you, Matt, for allowing me to finish the cross-examination at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett and Mr.
Thank you very
Lathbury. I think it would be a good time to have a break. Would 10 minutes be okay? Till
That's fine with me now.
20 to 4.
22.
Mr. Barrett, other parties, Mr. Village, Mr. Robson.
Very happy with that, ma'am.
Okay, well, I shall adjourn till 20 to 4. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. It's 20 to 4 and we shall recommence the inquiry. Is everyone back? Okay, thank you. Mrs. Job, did you have any questions of Mr. Lathbury?
I have, if I may, please. I've got, I think, 4 questions, if I can. Can you hear me, Mr. Lathbury?
Yeah, I apologise, it's quite faint.
Okay, I will try and speak up then. The letters that that accompanied the evidence, the proof of evidence, the 3 from Dignity's own funeral directors. Do you own funeral directors in Rotherham and in Pontefract area?
I don't know the exact location. We have a small funeral director in Rotherham, as I understand it. I couldn't be exactly sure on Pontefract. What we selected was we have about 16 funeral directors throughout the South Yorkshire area. So we selected funeral directors that have experience of the surrounding crematorium: Pontefract, Barnsley, Rotherham, and Doncaster.
Okay, so the two, those two, I think there's 2 from Doncaster, 1 from Barnsley, but there was nothing from the Rotherham or the Pontefract one. They've not got the same experience, I take it then?
No, we don't. Funny enough, we don't have a lot of funeral directors in the Rotherham area.
Okay, that's lovely. Thanks. That answered that question. On the other point, I know you're the development director of Dignity and responsible for overseeing new development of new crematorium and also in terms of acquisitions. Can you tell me when Dignity have taken over a local authority crematorium, have you at any stage during that time opened up a new crematorium within that local authority area?
No, we haven't. I don't want to go into too many commercial details, but sometimes the restricted covenant in terms of opening up new crematoria, obviously they give us their facility, they give us all the data, and for Dignity to open up and take all their business away is not what they're looking for.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right, no, that's fine. Okay, we'll go back to, I'm trying to understand, as I'm sure everybody's trying to understand, where Dignity gets this extra 30% of out of area customers coming to the new crematoria or any crematoria. So I have a theory, and I'd like to put it to you if I may. I put it to you that one of the reasons why Dignity, from its 65,000 cremations in 2019, through its Dignity digital simplicity offering, these prices are only valid if the consumer uses a Dignity crematorium. So they only can secure those prices whether it's a direct cremation, a hybrid, or as you'd like to say, you know, a small attended for 12 people, or a fully attended service, that they only secure those prices, and that's only valid if they go to a Dignity crematorium. So that, rather than choosing one that's closest to them or one that they would opt to choose out of choice, do you think that might be one of the reasons why Dignity's 30% out of area is significantly higher than perhaps the rest of the competitors or nationally?
No, absolutely not, because we stripped out direct cremations, and also we have contract cremations with medical schools, so we stripped those out because obviously they would distort the numbers. Because as you correctly state, we could do an unattended direct, 20, 30, 50 miles away from the closest Dignity crematorium. So we stripped those numbers out when we submitted it to the CMA.
Okay.
And our contracts as well.
Okay. And has that been done in your evidence in terms of the number of cremations that's been done at Rotherham?
In terms of, no, the volume at Rotherham includes all the cremations at that site.
So it hasn't been stripped out there either, no?
No, but if we were doing analysis on the geographical market of rather on, say, people who live closer to Barnsley or live closer to Doncaster, then obviously we exclude those directs, as we would exclude any contract. I don't think we have any medical school contracts in Rotherham, but we exclude those because it's not a geographical decision, it's a dignity decision.
Sorry, when you say direct, I think this is where everybody's getting a little bit confused. If you go through a funeral directors, you don't consider that as a direct one, but if you use the simplicity option, is that what you consider a direct cremation?
No, a direct cremation is not a defined term. We have direct cremation unattended, but you can go to any funeral director and they could utilise that service at a dignity crematorium. If you go to Simplicity and choose Simplicity over Low Cost Funeral or Pure or Promise Life or anyone else in the market, then Simplicity will move those direct cremations through our services. But you don't have to use Simplicity to get a direct dignity crematorium, if that helps.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of directs for independent funeral directors, and funnily enough, we do some directs for Memorial, and I'm pretty sure Memorial will do some directs for us, either intimate or attended.
I think I was just trying to understand whether, because Simplicity directs every cremation that goes to that site on its digital level, then it directs them to the nearest dignity site rather than to the nearest crematorium. And I'm just saying, the fact that there are no geographical constraints with that means that could significantly increase the number of people coming outside the area. Yeah, absolutely. And this is the issue I have with direct cremations that are attended, is that the market is still unknown. There's a lot of players in that market, but you're marketing it as a service. So if you have a Simplicity, you will be having that Simplicity, let's call it a Simplicity attended, you'll be having that Simplicity attended at a dignity crematorium. That's the offering. If you want to go to a Memorial crematorium, you can have a low cost funeral, but that will go to Memorial. But now some direct cremation offerings allow you to choose any crematorium in the UK. So the whole market is blurring between what's a direct cremation and what is a traditional funeral. You know, there is a crossing over point there somewhere. I understand that. And the market is still growing and it's still emerging and it's still evolving. That's why I probably give longer answers about directs than other issues. Because I honestly don't know where we're going to be kind of 5-10 years from now. We have a view and we model it and we present evidence, and that's what it is. And Memorial do the same, and Wesley have just joined the market as well. I understand that. This is with regards to attended funerals or attended cremations. And it's all in your marketing on Simplicity's website. I've actually rang up and actually tried to book an appointment and book a cremation just to double check that what's advertised is correct. And I'm sorry, but I'll read it out to you. This is not about direct cremations. This is about attended through Simplicity. Our team will assist you with arranging a date and time that is convenient for you and your family. Attended funerals take place Monday to Friday. The cremation will take place at one of our preferred crematoria, local to the place of rest. So in other words, it's one of your own. It's the same terminology that's used for unattended or intimate, which is the smaller hybrid attended, or the full attended. It means that they're all being directed, irregardless of where you live, to the nearest dignity crematoria. Yeah, and that was a call for most companies, direct cremation attended offerings, that they're directed towards the crema operators. Obviously, if you move above that and say we give you the unrestricted direct cremation and you can choose any crematorium in the UK, then you're into just normally booking out any crematorium in the UK. The key difference I discern, a direct cremation typically, and even now direct cremations are starting to include a hearse and limousine. Typically, a direct cremation will not involve a funeral cortege, a hearse and limousine. But as I say that,
direct cremator operators are moving into those vehicle provision of hearses certainly, and I've seen a few limousines on offer. So where a direct cremation ends and a full service funeral begins is blurring.
Not according to your marketing, it's not.
No, not in terms of dignity, because we have 3 offerings, but we're not the only offering in the marketplace.
Yeah.
There are a large number of companies, some of them crematoria operators, some of them end-of-life services, and I mean kind of probate and kind of will writing companies. You know, there's a lot, it's going to sound horrible, but there's a lot of people, you know, interested in the bereavement space for commercial purposes.
Okay, thank you for that. That's all my questions, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Strobb, and thank you, Mr. Lethbury, for your contributions today. I don't have any questions for you, so you may now relax. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Village, hello.
Mr. Examine him.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So please unrelax.
I'm not relaxed.
Good. That's the way I like it. You were taken to the CMA report, and I just really want to step back a couple of steps to see what the relevance of the CMA report is. And the first, and indeed you mentioned this in your answers to my own friend Mr. Barrett, you made reference to the evidence of Mr. Hodgson, where at paragraph 9.19 of his proof of evidence.
So what we're looking at, Mr. Village?
We're looking at Hodgson proof of evidence 9.19. And surprisingly enough, 9.19 follows paragraph 9.18, which I'm going to come to in a moment. But 9.19 says, in reality, it's unlikely for any crematorium operator to be able to find one single location that could succeed in reducing pressure on all of these locations, owing to the fact that they're spread too far apart. 1 to 2 new developments in different locations closer to each of the existing crematoria would have a better chance of diverting more cremations away from the sites that have issues with the capacity pressure. Were you present when Mr. Mitchell, in cross-examination, agreed that there was in fact there would be a requirement for at least one more crematorium in the event that permission was granted for Brodsworth?
Yes.
So, and just as a matter of interest, do you agree or disagree with the position taken by Mr. Hodgson in that paragraph 9.19, which is that 1 to 2 new developments in different locations would be required in order to deal with capacity pressure?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as I stated in my response, that, you know, Barnby Dun services mainly to the north and to the rural areas extending north of Doncaster through there, does very little to alleviate the western arc of Rotherham, Barnsley and Pontefract. And the Brodsworth will bring more choice and better qualitative offerings to people to the west of Doncaster, and also alleviate some of the stress from the eastern side of the Western Arc of Pontefract, Barnsley and Rotherham. So two crematoria are more than viable and will provide a more comprehensive solution to the issues that I don't think anyone is arguing about the age and the qualitative offering of the crematoria in those areas.
Right, now, a couple of things are rising. The first is that and this again goes to some questions from Mr. Barrett, in 9.18, it's said by Mr. Hodgson, the map, which is the map at I think it's a map earlier in his proof of evidence, clearly shows that the 30-minute cortege drive time of the appeal site does not cover the main centres of population that are currently served by Barnsley, Pontefract and Rotherham. That's why it's flawed for the appellant to suggest that the appeal site is well positioned to reduce pressure on each of these crematoria. And in his cross-examination, Mr. Barrett effectively repeated that point by suggesting that the main centres of population were to the west of the existing Western Arc crematoria, and that you'd have to drive past those crematoria to get to any crematorium which was to the west of them, to the east of them. Would you just turn, please, get Mr. Best's proof of evidence out? And I just wanted to see whether that's
Bear with me, I'll slowly now. It's just loading. I naively closed some of these files down, so it's a bit with me again.
Yeah, and it's figure 10.2a. And what this is a rather helpful plan, because it shows you where all the existing crematoria are around Rotherham, Barnsley and Pontefract, and it shows you in a darker shade the natural catchment area of the appeal proposal. Now, first of all,
sorry, that's still loading, so I'm a bit.
Oh right, sorry.
Sorry, it's still.
Would it be helpful if someone brought in?
I can bring it in. We'll probably load up at the same time.
Someone take a copy into his room, please. We're just about to be.
Thank you. Yeah, 10.28. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and you see what we. So it shows where the crematoria are at Pontefract, Barnsley and Rotherham, and obviously Rose Hill and Barnby Dun. Is it correct that there are centres of population in Pontefract and Barnsley and even Rotherham that are that would have to drive past the existing crematorium to reach the appeal proposal?
Yeah, you can clearly see that extent to which there are populations to the south of Pontefract and even in the centre of Pontefract, and certainly Barnsley, and to the northeast of Rotherham. And looking at the map, almost certainly kind of towns and villages and communities that are clearly will not have to drive past an existing crematory to utilise the services at Brodsworth.
Yeah, and those are within the 30-minute drive time are they of the of Brodsworth?
Yes, they're quite clearly
Yeah.
a large amount of communities and a large number of poorly served communities that will have an alternative choice.
So do you accept or reject the contention that was made to you by Mr. Barrett to the contrary?
Yeah, I absolutely reject that contention, and I think that map clearly highlights the interrelationship between the various operating crematoria, and obviously what that doesn't highlight, and I think it's a matter of agreement, is that there's an arc from Rosehill through to Rotherham up to Barnsley and Pontefract of old and qualitatively deficient crematoria.
Now, going back then to this central proposition, Mr. Lafferty, which is that that there would be a requirement for 1 to 2 new developments in different locations to have a better chance of diverting more cremations away from the sites that have issues with capacity. And you certainly accept that there would be a requirement for another 1 or possibly another 2 crematoria in addition to the appeal site. What's the effect, in your judgment, and you've seen the figures from Mr. Mitchell, from Mr. Best, what's the effect, in your judgment, of the relief given by the appeal scheme to the overall need in the Western Arc?
I think, as I stated in my evidence, I think there'll be a significant impact in that Western Arch. We've done modelling on it. As an operator, I think, judging by those crematoria, and it is the experience that you look at the facilities on offer and the layout, the car parking and the age of the chapels, that I believe there will be a significant impact in the deficiencies at that Western Arc crematorium, and potentially there may need to be another requirement for one to the further north of that area as well.
Now, this then leads back to where we started, the CMA report, and questions from Mr. Barrett about the conclusions from the CMA, in particular in relation to qualitative aspects. And I wonder if you could just remind yourself of what the CMA report was saying. If you go back to your paragraph 3.29, last sentence, the central concern arising from the market study was the pricing of services and bereaved families being given more choice. Bereaved families being given
that 3.29.
3.29 of your proof.
Oh, sorry, I was on the CMA. Sorry, Mr. Steve. Yeah.
So the central concern arising from the market study was the pricing of services and bereaved families being given more choice. Would you take up, please, the rebuttal of Mr. Best? Do you have a copy of that?
Yeah.
And in particular, it's the decision in the Oxted Surrey case, dated the 30th of September 2021.
We might allow it.
again, we can perhaps someone can supply you with a copy. It's JPB6, madam, just for your note.
Yeah, what paragraph was that?
Yeah, and the paragraph I want to have a look at is 2 paragraphs. Paragraph 47, firstly. Considering Tandridge as part of 6 authorities on this edge of the London conurbation, the demographic and capacity evidence is that there's a current need for more than 1 crematorium, rising to at least 4 by 2041. Particularly given the long lead-in time for provision, it's reasonable for planning decisions to account for this current and future need, which this proposal would help meet. The scheme would also increase customer choice in the range of cremation facilities on offer, with the added competition potentially lowering costs, which would provide significant benefits to the community in this area. And it's that last sentence that I want you to focus on, laser-like. The scheme would also increase consumer choice in the range of cremation facilities on offer, with the added competition potentially lowering costs, which would provide significant benefits to the community in this area. First question, does that accord, or is it in conflict with what the CMA sought to are seeking to achieve?
No, that's in a nutshell is exactly the objective that the CMA were trying to achieve. First of all, they were looking at giving consumers a choice, and in their view, when consumers are given a choice, there is a major benefit to them in terms of choosing where and when they wish a cremation to take place without undue waiting times, and hopefully that competition will either cap prices or potentially could lead to lower cost of services as people compete for those consumers.
And this was identified by the inspectors providing significant benefits to the community in this area. And go to paragraph 51 now of the inspector's decision.
Yeah.
And he says, however, cremation facilities meet an essential community need, which in this area is currently not being fully met, either quantitatively or qualitatively, with demand forecast to increase steeply. Now, just for a moment, let's assume that Barnby Dun was on stream, that it was live. Even with Barnby Dun on stream, could it be said that cremation facilities are being fully met in this location with Barnby Dun?
No, absolutely not. It's quite clearly when you looked at the natural catchment area maps there, Barnby Dun, as I keep saying, was servicing areas to the north of Doncaster, bordered to the east by a very kind of rural area, whereas the Brodsworth scheme is coming into a more poorly served and busier area with a wider demographic and a wider need that is only being marginally touched upon by Barnby Dun in terms of Pontefract, Barnsley and Rutherford. Yeah.
And it goes on to say, the proposal would make a significant contribution towards meeting the existing and growing need. This is a need to which I attach very substantial weight. Along with the incidental social, economic and environmental benefits the scheme would provide, I find that the other considerations in this case clearly outweigh the harm that I've identified. Now, let's not get into the numbers. We'll ask Mr. Best to assist us with that in a moment. But just on the hypothesis that over half over half the cremations being undertaken at Brodsworth were coming from the west. In other words, it was relieving the Western Arc to about over half its cremations. Would you agree or disagree that the proposal would make a significant contribution towards meeting an existing and growing need?
Yeah, I was going to say that the need already exists, and the pressure on those 3 crematorium exists as of today. That pressure is only going to get worse as we've already identified with the demographic kind of profile that we're seeing throughout the UK. That's going to wash through. So very clearly there's going to be a significant harm in terms of choice for those crematorium, which as soon as you introduce a further choice, then that harm is going to be significantly reduced, both in today's terms and clearly as you expand out 10, 15 years and there's further pressure on those facilities. You know, it's a demographic inevitability. There's an aging population in the UK. You know, we see it in the news every day. And that tsunami of aging population is going to come the way of the bereavement services.
I think if I go back to that plan that we were looking at in Mr. Best's evidence, it's figure 10.2a.
Yeah.
Even if there is identified another site or sites closer to Pontefract, Barnsley or Rotherham to the east of those, or to the north or to the east of Barnsley, or to the south of Pontefract, or to the north of Rotherham. I mean, you undertook the site selection process. Would that site fall within the greenbelt?
Yeah, in my view, the sites we looked at when we're doing our site searches, the majority as you head westward over the A1M were greenbelt sites, and there's a sway of a greenbelt area there. So it's highly unlikely there's going to be a non-greenbelt site available there.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think we just need to just, as I say, stand back for a moment, Mr. Lathbury. Is there, in fact, very much between you and Mr. Mitchell, and dare I say, Mr. Hodgson, about the need for an additional, maybe 2 additional sites in addition to Brodsworth?
Yeah, I was going to say from what I heard of Mr. Mitchell's evidence and Mr. Hodgson's evidence, there's clearly a need to add further new crematory provision in the area, and I think it will be extremely difficult to alleviate three crematoria with a single site. So I agree with the statement that at least 1, if not 2, new crematoria in that area.
Yeah, and good. Okay, well, I think that's, and I think that's all I need to ask you. That just give me a moment to check my other notes. Very grateful. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, Mr. Lathbury and Mr. Village. I'm very conscious of time and the fact that we're running out of time this week. So my preference would be to continue with the timetable in terms of Mr. Best giving evidence in chief before we break for today. That would certainly be my preference, otherwise we won't be able to catch that time up. I'm happy to take views on that, though it may require a slightly later finish today. But I think we need to have some level of flexibility on that. Would that be Mr. Village as your witness? Would that be acceptable? Mr. Village?
Certainly we should continue, Madam, in our view, and make the best use of the rest of the afternoon to 5 o'clock or a convenient moment. I don't think we're going to finish the evidence in chief in that time, so there's going to be a hangover, but it's not one that causes us any particular concern. And as I say, I think it will allow us to at least do half the examination in chief this evening before we break.
Well, I think my preference would be, in order to keep on track with the timetable, to sit slightly later if needs be. Otherwise, we're just looking at the evidence for tomorrow and Thursday. We'll not catch that time up, and I'd rather not hang over any of the main evidence, till the end of November, early December. I'd rather finish that main evidence. So yeah, I'm looking for a degree of flexibility. There just isn't really much scope, without unduly having to reduce cross-examination times which have already been reduced, to catch that up. So my preference would be to sit slightly later today, just in the interests of finishing the main evidence off before the end of Thursday.
Very well, if that's your wish, Madam, that's what we shall do.
Okay, Mr. Robson, Mr. Barrett, is that acceptable?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, without further ado, Mr. Village, would you like to call Mr.
Do you mind if there is a bit of further ado, because we just want to set Mr. Best up in the witness room, and so if you just give us 5 minutes whilst we rearrange our stuff, and then we can get cracking with him.
No problem. Is your witness sitting comfortably, Mr. Village?
Yeah, I think he probably is, because whatever else can be said about criticism about these chambers, the chairs are extremely comfortable, sometimes far too comfortable.
It wouldn't do for the witness to fall asleep, would it?
Well, it has been known whilst I've been cross-examining someone, or indeed examining them in chief. Right. I don't know where he's gone to, though. Is he there?
Mr. Best?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, right. Good.
Welcome to the inquiry.
Thank you.
Mr. Village,
You
would
don't
you
take your
like to?
security tag off. I'm sure that's perfectly fine.
Forgot about that. I normally walk out of buildings with it on and down into the underground.
Okay, right. So could I introduce you, please, Mr. Best, to the inquiry? You're Jonathan Paul Best, and you're a partner at Montague Evans, a partnership of chartered surveyors and property consultants.
Correct.
You hold a Bachelor of Science Honours degree and diploma in town planning from the University of Wales, and you're a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. You've been engaged in the practice of town planning as a consultant for over 30 years, initially at Healy and Baker, then Rapley's, as well as Collier's CRE. In 2002, you founded Blue Sky Planning, an independent consultancy dedicated to providing town planning and services, and that merged with Montague Evans in April 2015. Your experience covers a wide range of commercial and residential projects spanning a broad range of planning issues, and this has included advising owners, occupiers and developers of land and property, as well as local authorities. Throughout your career, you've been involved in expert assessment of the issue of need for new development, both in quantitative and qualitative terms. Your experience in this area includes extensive expert methodological assessment for different types of need assessment, including not only for crematoria, but also retail for major retail operators, including Aldi, Lidl, Morrison's, Safeway and Tesco, and employment and retail parks, including for Aberdeen Standard, AXA, CRGE, GI, Hammerson, Land Securities, LaSalle Asset Management, M&G, the Drown Estate and TH Retail Estate. And you've drawn upon this experience in advising Dignity on a number of its proposals for new crematoria, including its proposed crematorium at Brodsworth. And then you give a statement of truth as an expert witness at 1.8. You confirm, and I'd ask you to confirm this orally, that the evidence which you have prepared and provide for the appeal is true and has been prepared and is given in accordance with the guidance of your professional institution, and you confirm that the opinions expressed are your true and professional opinions. Is that correct?
Yes, that's all correct.
Thank you. Now we'll take the proof of evidence as read. However, there are some typographical errors within it, and an erratum sheet has been circulated, or should have been circulated, and Madam, I would ask you to look out for that. I don't propose to go through the